Branded illiterate in public, moments later, he shocked the entire room. The yellow mop bucket sat between Desmond Clarke and 23 people who would decide his fate in the next 60 seconds. He'd been reaching for it, just reaching down to move it out of the doorway, when his hand brushed the manila folder on the floor. The one with Confidential, Meridian Tech v Highland Industries stamped across the front. His fingers had closed around it instinctively, the same way they used to close around case files 15 years ago when he wore suits that cost more than he now made in a month. But Richard Pemberton didn't see a man picking up a dropped document. He saw a custodian holding something he had no right to touch. Can someone explain why he's standing in the middle of a partner meeting with a confidential file? The words sliced through the conference room like a verdict. Desmond's grip tightened on the folder, his other hand still holding the mop handle. Water pooled at his feet from the freshly cleaned hallway. 23 pairs of eyes locked onto him, some curious, most annoyed, one pair burning with something that looked like disgust. Pemberton stood up slowly, deliberately. "We all saw you last week in the break room. Moving your lips over documents like you were sounding out the words. Touching each line with your finger like a child learning to read." Desmond's jaw clenched. He could explain. Should explain. But something stopped him. 12 years of staying invisible, of keeping his head down, of surviving by being forgettable. Just what? Pemberton's voice dropped to something almost pitying. "You thought you'd educate yourself? That's sweet. But this is a law firm. These documents require actual literacy." The room fell completely silent. Desmond stood there, yellow bucket at his feet, folder in hand, his entire past and present colliding in a moment that demanded he choose, stay invisible and safe, or risk everything by being seen. What none of them knew, what he'd spent 12 years making sure no one would ever know, was about to become the only thing that mattered. Before we dive deep into this jaw-dropping story, quick pause. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. I love seeing our global Curious Chronicles family light up the map. If you're already hooked and craving more inspiring and captivating stories that poke curiosity like this one, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We drop beautiful, heart-pounding stories every week that you seriously don't want to miss. So let's dive right into it. Desmond set the folder on the conference table with hands that didn't shake, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs. He didn't look at Pemberton. Didn't look at any of them. Just placed it down gently and backed toward the door. "Stick to cleaning," Pemberton said, already turning back to his laptop. "Leave the thinking to people qualified to do it." The door clicked shut behind him with a sound like a cell locking. Desmond gripped his mop handle and pushed the cart down the hallway, wheel squeaking against marble floors that he'd buffed to a shine every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years. Third floor. Executive wing. The smell of expensive leather and fresh coffee. The quiet hum of power. He'd learned to move through these spaces like air, present but unnoticed, necessary but invisible. That was the deal he'd made with himself when he took this job. Keep your head down. Do your work. Cash your paycheck. Don't let anyone see who you used to be. Because who he used to be had destroyed him once already. 15 years ago, Desmond Clarke had walked these same floors in a different building, wearing Tom Ford suits and Italian leather shoes. He'd been an attorney at Morrison & Webb, one of Chicago's elite firms. Intellectual property and contract law. 6 figures. Corner office. A wife and daughter in a Lincoln Park brownstone. He'd had everything a black kid from the South Side could dream of achieving. Then 2008 hit like a freight train. The firm downsized. His position was redundant. The severance lasted 4 months. The job interviews came back with overqualified or not the right fit or nothing at all. His wife left, took their daughter to Atlanta. The mortgage became impossible. The car got repossessed. The savings evaporated. By 2010, Desmond was living in a shelter on West Madison, standing in line for meals, trying to figure out how a man with a law degree from Northwestern ended up with nothing. By 2012, When Hammond and Associates posted an opening for night custodial staff, he didn't hesitate. He needed work. He needed health insurance. He needed to stop being the person he used to be, because that person had failed catastrophically. So he became the man in the blue uniform. The one who emptied trash cans and restocked paper towels and cleaned conference rooms after midnight when all the lawyers had gone home. The one who was 52 years old and invisible and alive, which was more than he'd been 3 years before that. He told himself it was enough. Told himself he'd made peace with it. But late at night, after everyone left, he couldn't help himself. The discarded case files in the recycling bins. The legal pads left on desks with notes scribbled in margins. The briefs abandoned because a single word was misspelled. He'd collect them during his rounds, stack them in the break room, and read them while he ate his sandwich at 2 a.m. Not because he had to. Because his brain wouldn't let him stop. The law was still in his blood, still the only thing that made him feel like himself. He told himself it was harmless. A private addiction. No one would know. But last Tuesday, Pemberton had walked into the break room and found Desmond hunched over a brief, finger tracing along a complex arbitration clause, lips moving as he worked through the logic. Desmond had been so absorbed he hadn't heard the door. He'd looked up to find Pemberton staring at him with an expression somewhere between amusement and contempt. Trying to better yourself. Pemberton had said, voice dripping with condescension. That's admirable. Really. But maybe start with something simpler than federal contract law. Desmond had nodded, closed the file, and gone back to work. He'd felt Pemberton's eyes on him the whole time. Now, pushing his cart past the conference room, he could hear raised voices through the glass. The Meridian Tech case. He'd been following it for 2 weeks through fragments, a printed email here, a discarded draft there. The firm was bleeding. A $7 million client on the verge of walking because Highland Industries had found a loophole in their contract. Hammond and Associates had 3 weeks to fix it or lose everything. And Desmond knew exactly where the mistake was. He'd found the contract in the recycling bin 4 days ago. He'd read it twice, and on the second pass, he'd spotted it, buried on page 47, in a subsection that referenced an addendum that was never properly executed. The kind of error a sharp attorney might catch, but only if they knew what they were looking for. He could tell them. Walk back into that conference room and explain what they were missing. But that would mean revealing everything. The degree. The career. The fall. And then what? They'd either think he was lying, or they'd wonder what kind of man with a Northwestern Law degree ends up mopping floors. Either way, he'd lose the only stability he had. So Desmond did what he'd been doing for 12 years. He went to the supply closet, refilled his cart, and prepared to finish his shift. The case would fail or it wouldn't. It wasn't his problem anymore. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen survival. At least, that's what he told himself. Desmond Clarke arrived at Hammond & Associates at 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes early like he had been every weekday for the past 3 years. He swiped his ID card at the service entrance, heard the lock click open, and stepped into the fluorescent-lit hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and recycled air. The night guard, Marcus, nodded at him from behind the desk. Evening, Des. Evening. That was the entire conversation. It was always the entire conversation. Desmond had learned early that being forgettable was a form of protection. People didn't ask questions if you didn't give them reasons to wonder. He walked to the custodial supply room on the ground floor, unlocked it with the key he kept on a simple metal ring, and began loading his cart. Yellow mop bucket. Disinfectant spray. Microfiber cloths. Trash bags. Glass cleaner. Everything in the same order, every single night. Routine was another form of invisibility. By 6:15 p.m., he was on the 3rd floor. The executive wing was mostly empty at this hour. A few associates still hunched over their computers in the open workspace, fingers flying across keyboards, faces lit by the blue glow of multiple monitors. Desmond moved between them like a shadow, emptying small trash cans, wiping down desks, never making eye contact unless someone looked directly at him. Most didn't. He started with the conference rooms. 4 of them lined the east side of the floor, glass-walled spaces where decisions that affected millions of dollars happened every day. Desmond had cleaned these rooms 1,000 times. He'd wiped fingerprints off glass walls while partners shouted about settlements. He'd vacuumed under tables where associates had fallen asleep during all-night document reviews. He'd emptied trash cans full of crumpled drafts of motions that would never see a courtroom. And he'd learned to stop seeing it as waste. The first conference room was clean. The second needed dusting. The third had coffee rings on the table that took 3 passes with cleaner to remove. In the fourth, someone had left a stack of files on the side table. Desmond sprayed the glass walls, working methodically from left to right. But his eyes kept drifting to those files. Client names visible on the tabs. Case numbers. The familiar formatting of legal documents that his brain still recognized like a native language he couldn't forget even after years of disuse. He shouldn't look. He knew he shouldn't look. But at 7:43 p.m., when he was certain everyone had left the floor, he set down his spray bottle and walked to the side table. Meridian Tech Industries versus Highland Manufacturing Corp. His fingers hovered over the top file. This wasn't in the recycling. This was an active case, left out carelessly by someone in a hurry. He should report it to security. Confidential documents weren't supposed to be accessible to cleaning staff. Instead, he opened it. The motion for summary judgment was dated 3 days ago. Desmond's eyes moved across the page, falling into old patterns, scanning for the legal question, identifying the standard of review, looking for the strength of the argument. His lips moved slightly as he read, a habit from law school that he'd never broken. The physical act of forming words helping his brain process complex clauses. The argument was weak. He saw it immediately. The liability section relied on a force majeure provision, but the cross-reference in subsection 12b pointed to an addendum that, he flipped to the back, wasn't fully executed. Only one signature. The defendant's legal team was probably using a complete version, which meant Hammond and Associates was arguing based on terms that might not be enforceable. Desmond closed the file carefully, exactly as he'd found it. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight. This was the problem with his late-night reading habit. He couldn't just see the words anymore. He saw the mistakes, the missed arguments, the strategic errors that could cost a client everything. And he couldn't do anything about it. He finished cleaning the conference room, returned to his cart, and moved to the next section of the floor. Partner offices lined the west side. Most were dark, but one still had lights on. Richard Pemberton's office. Desmond had learned all their names in the first month. Not because anyone introduced themselves, but because he'd read the nameplates on doors while he dusted them. Pemberton was a senior partner, mid-50s. Always wore expensive suits that probably cost what Desmond made in 3 months. Always left his office a mess, coffee cups on every surface, papers scattered, gym bag in the corner that smelled like it hadn't been washed in weeks. Desmond knocked lightly on the open door. Pemberton looked up from his laptop, irritated at the interruption. "Yeah. Just need to empty your trash, sir. Make it quick." Desmond moved efficiently, pulling the bag from the can under the desk, tying it off, replacing it with a fresh liner. Pemberton didn't look at him. Most of them didn't. To people like Pemberton, Desmond was functionally invisible, a service that happened automatically, like electricity or running water. As Desmond turned to leave, he saw the recycling bin overflowing with crumpled papers. His eyes caught a case name before he could stop himself. Meridian Tech. He glanced at Pemberton, who was typing furiously, completely absorbed. Then Desmond reached down and started transferring papers from the recycling bin to his trash bag. One sheet was only partially crumpled. He smoothed it against his leg while pretending to adjust the bag. It was an email chain. The client was threatening to pull their contract. $7 million in annual fees. The managing partner had given Pemberton 3 weeks to fix the summary judgment motion, or the client would find new representation. 2 weeks had already passed. Desmond folded the paper into his pocket and finished clearing the recycling. "All set, sir." Pemberton didn't respond. Desmond pushed his cart into the hallway and kept walking. His heart was beating faster than it should. He had information now. Information that could matter. Information that could save a case if anyone knew he had it. But telling them would require explaining how he recognized the error. It would require revealing who he used to be. And he'd spent 3 years building a life where no one asked him questions he didn't want to answer. At 9:30 p.m., Desmond took his break in the small custodial break room on the second floor. He microwaved the chicken and rice he'd packed that morning, poured himself coffee from the pot he'd made at the start of his shift, and sat at the table with the email he'd taken from Pemberton's office. 3 weeks to fix an unfixable motion. 2 weeks already gone. The mistake was structural, built into the foundation of the argument. There was no way to patch it without rebuilding from scratch. Unless someone noticed the unsigned addendum. Desmond pulled out his phone and opened the photo gallery. Near the back, buried under pictures of his daughter's nursing school graduation and the potted plant on his apartment windowsill, was a folder labeled Old Docs. Inside were photos of his law degree, his bar admission certificate, a newspaper clipping from 2004 when he'd won a major IP case for a tech startup. Evidence of a life that felt like it had happened to someone else. He stared at the images for a long time. Then he closed the folder and deleted the email from his pocket, ripping it into pieces too small to read. At 11:15 p.m., Desmond was cleaning the partner break room when he heard voices approaching. He recognized Pemberton's irritated tone before he saw him. "Don't care what they want. The motion is solid. The client doesn't think so." A woman's voice. Catherine Hong, the managing partner. "They're meeting with Berkowitz and Sullivan on Friday. If they like what they hear, we're done." Desmond kept his head down, wiping the counter slowly. "We need fresh eyes on this," Hong continued. "Someone who can see what we're missing." "There's nothing to miss. Highland's argument is bullshit and we can prove it." "Then why are we losing?" The voices stopped right outside the break room. Desmond felt their presence in the doorway but didn't look up. "Is this room clean?" Hong asked. "Almost finished." Desmond said quietly. "Quickly, please." He gathered his supplies and pushed his cart toward the door. As he passed them, Pemberton stepped aside without looking at him. Hong glanced at him briefly, the kind of look you'd give a piece of furniture you were walking around, and then turned back to Pemberton. "We're running out of time, Richard." Desmond pushed his cart down the hallway. Behind him, their voices faded into the ambient hum of the building's ventilation system. He had 6 more offices to clean. Then the bathrooms. Then the main lobby. Another 3 hours of work before his shift ended at 2 a.m. 3 hours to decide if staying invisible was worth watching something collapse that he knew how to fix. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from his daughter in Atlanta. "Can you talk tomorrow? Got some news about the clinical rotation." Desmond smiled and typed back quickly. "Call me at 7:30 a.m. Proud of you." He put the phone away and kept pushing his cart. One office. Then another. Routine and rhythm. The comfortable invisibility of someone who'd learned that survival meant keeping your head down. But as he passed the conference room where the Meridian Tech files still sat on the side table, Desmond stopped walking. Through the glass wall, he could see the documents exactly where he'd left them. The error buried on page 47. The unsigned addendum that could change everything. He stood there for 37 seconds, his hands gripping the cart handle. Then he took out his phone and opened the camera. He needed to be sure. Just to be sure. One more look at the section he'd read earlier, to confirm he hadn't imagined the mistake. That's all. Nothing more. The conference room door was unlocked. Desmond glanced down the hallway. Empty. Quiet. He could hear his own breathing. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. October 2008. Desmond Clarke sat in the conference room at Morrison & Webb, watching Thomas Morrison's mouth move but not really hearing the words anymore. Something about restructuring. Something about market conditions. Something about difficult decisions. Desmond's hands were folded on the table in front of him. His wedding ring caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. Outside, Chicago moved like it always did, oblivious, indifferent, alive. "We value everything you've brought to the firm," Morrison was saying. "Your work on the TechStream patent case was exceptional. But with the current economic climate, how long?" Desmond heard himself ask. Morrison blinked. "I'm sorry. How long do I have?" "Your last day will be November 7th. We're offering 4-month severance, continuation of benefits through January, and of course excellent recommendations." Desmond stopped listening again. November 7th. 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks to figure out how to tell his wife that the corner office was gone, the salary was gone, the future they'd been building for 12 years was gone. He walked out of Morrison & Webb at 3:47 p.m. carrying a box with a desk lamp, 3 framed photos, and a coffee mug his daughter had given him that said "World's Best Dad." The security guard who'd greeted him every morning for 8 years didn't meet his eyes. That night, Desmond sat at the dining room table in their Lincoln Park brownstone and told Yanel. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a wine glass she didn't drink from. "Okay," she said when he finished. "Okay. We'll figure it out. You'll find something else. You're good at what you do." He wanted to believe her. He tried to believe her. But November became December became January, and something else never materialized. The first interview was at a mid-sized firm in the Loop. The hiring partner looked at his resume, looked at him, and said, "Your experience is impressive, but we're looking for someone who's a better cultural fit." Desmond knew what that meant. He'd heard those words before, just never directed at him. The second interview ended with "You're overqualified for this position." The third, "We're moving in a different direction." The fourth, "We'll be in touch." They weren't. By March 2009, the severance was gone. By April, they'd burned through half their savings. Desmond stopped telling Yanel about the interviews that led nowhere. He'd leave the house at 8 a.m. in a suit, spend the day at the library applying to jobs online, and come home at 6 p.m. with nothing. In May, Yanel's sister offered him a position at her husband's insurance company. Sales. Cold calling. $23,000 a year. "It's not legal work," she'd said carefully, "but it's something." Desmond had stared at the offer letter for 2 hours before declining. He had a law degree from Northwestern. He'd argued cases in federal court. He couldn't sell insurance. That was his first mistake. In June, they missed the first mortgage payment. In July, the second. The bank's letters started arriving, friendly at first, then insistent, then threatening. Yanel got a job as an office manager. It helped, but not enough. They started selling things. The second car. The furniture from the guest room. Desmond's law books. One by one, pieces of their life disappeared into classified ads and Craigslist transactions. By August, Yanel had stopped looking at him the same way. Something had shifted in her eyes, not quite contempt, but close. Disappointment, maybe, or worse, pity. "My mother's helping with Keisha's school clothes," she said one night, not looking at him. "I can handle that," Desmond said. "With what?" He didn't have an answer. In September, she took Keisha to Atlanta for what was supposed to be a week-long visit with her parents. They stayed 2 weeks. Then 3. When she called, Keisha got on the line first, asking when Daddy was coming to visit, her voice bright and trusting. Then Yanel took the phone back. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I can't watch you give up." "I'm not giving up. I'm trying." You're trying to get back something that's gone. The economy collapsed. Desmond. It's not coming back. Not for you. Not right now. But you won't take anything else because it's beneath you. That's not. Yes, it is. And I get it. I understand. But I have a daughter to raise, and I can't do it in a house we're losing while you wait for some magical job that doesn't exist. Her voice cracked. I love you, but I can't stay. The divorce papers arrived in November, the same month he'd lost his job, exactly 1 year later. By December 2009, Desmond was living in a studio apartment in Humboldt Park that smelled like mildew and someone else's cooking. The brownstone was gone. Yanel and Keisha were gone. Most of his possessions were in a storage unit he could barely afford. He kept applying to jobs, law firms, corporations, non-profits, government positions. His resume was impeccable. His references were strong. But there were 100 other lawyers applying to the same positions, and most of them hadn't been unemployed for over a year. The gap in his employment history became impossible to explain. What have you been doing since Morrison and Webb? Looking for the right opportunity. For 14 months. He watched their expressions change. Saw them wondering what was wrong with him. Why no one else wanted him. What he'd done to deserve this kind of professional death. In March 2010, the studio apartment became unaffordable. He moved into a friend's basement. In May, the friend needed the space back. Desmond spent 2 weeks sleeping in his car before admitting he couldn't do that anymore either. The shelter on West Madison had a bed available. The intake counselor was a young woman with kind eyes who didn't ask too many questions. How long do you think you'll need to stay? Just until I get back on my feet. She'd nodded like she believed him. Later, he'd realized she'd heard that same sentence from hundreds of men who never left. Desmond spent 6 months in that shelter. He kept his suits in a locker, pressed them as best he could, and continued applying to jobs. But something had broken inside him. The interviews became performances where he played a character called Desmond Clarke, attorney at law, a person who no longer felt real. In January 2011, a man at the shelter told him about day labor, construction cleanup, moving jobs, $10 an hour, cash, no questions asked. Desmond worked his first day labor shift in a wool coat over his last good shirt, clearing debris from a demolished building. His hands blistered. His back screamed. At the end of the day, the foreman handed him $80 and told him to come back tomorrow if he wanted. He went back tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Slowly, the law receded. He stopped applying to legal jobs. Stopped checking his email. Stopped pretending he was going to climb back up to where he'd been. The fall had been too far, too fast. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. By 2012, Desmond had saved enough to rent a room in Rogers Park. He had day labor work 3 or 4 times a week. He sent money to Yanel for Keisha whenever he could, not much, but something. He was surviving. That's when he saw the job posting. Hammond and Associates. Night custodial position. Benefits after 90 days. Steady schedule. Desmond stared at it for a long time. He could apply. He could take the job. He could stop pretending he was going to be an attorney again. He could just exist. Be invisible. Keep his head down. Survive. The alternative was continuing like this. Day labor, uncertainty, 1 missed rent payment away from being back in the shelter. He applied that afternoon. The interview was with a facilities manager who barely looked at his application. You have reliable transportation. Yes. Clean background check. Yes. You're overqualified for this. Desmond met his eyes. I just need steady work. The manager studied him for a moment, then nodded. Start Monday. Desmond Clarke became a custodian at Hammond and Associates on March 12, 2012. He told himself it was temporary. A bridge to something better. But 3 years later, he was still there. Still invisible. Still cleaning the floors he used to walk across in expensive shoes. Still wondering if this was how the rest of his life would look. Until the night he picked up a case file from the floor of a conference room and Richard Pemberton looked at him like he was something less than human. That's when Desmond realized invisibility had a price. And he'd been paying it for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Now, standing alone in the empty conference room with the Meridian tech files spread across the table, Desmond's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "Is this Desmond Clarke? I got your number from the Northwestern Alumni Directory. I'm a partner at Berkowitz and Sullivan. We're meeting with Hammond and Associates' biggest client Friday morning. Word is they're switching firms. If you know anything about their casework, I'd love to buy you coffee. Could be worth your time." Desmond stared at the message. Then at the files on the table. Then at the door. Someone knew who he was. Someone had found him. And they wanted information that could destroy the firm that employed him, the firm that had given him stability when he had nothing. His finger hovered over the delete button. Then the conference room door opened. Richard Pemberton stood in the doorway of the conference room, jacket off, tie loosened, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. His eyes moved from Desmond to the files spread across the table, then back to Desmond. "What are you doing?" Desmond's phone was still in his hand, the message from Berkowitz and Sullivan glowing on the screen. He turned it face down. The door was unlocked. "I was just making sure everything was secure before I cleaned." Pemberton walked into the room slowly, his eyes never leaving Desmond's face. "At 11:30 at night. You're making sure files are secure?" "Yes, sir." "Files you were told very clearly this morning not to touch." Desmond said nothing. His heart was hammering, but his hand stayed steady. Pemberton came closer, stopping a few feet from the table. He looked at the open contract, at the pages Desmond had been photographing with his phone before the text interrupted him. His jaw tightened. "Were you taking pictures?" "No, sir." "Show me your phone." The air in the room changed. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a test, maybe a trap. Desmond had no legal obligation to show his personal phone to anyone, but he also had no way to refuse without making everything worse. He unlocked the phone and handed it over. Pemberton scrolled through the recent photos. His face was unreadable. Then he stopped, staring at something on the screen. "What's this?" Desmond couldn't see what he was looking at. "What's what?" Pemberton turned the phone around. It was a photo from 3 days ago, a page from a different case file, something Desmond had found in the recycling bin. Notes about a patent dispute. He'd photographed it to read later during his break. "I found it in the trash," Desmond said. "I was just..." "Just what?" "Educating yourself." Pemberton's voice was cold now. "You're taking pictures of confidential documents. That's theft of intellectual property. That's grounds for immediate termination and possible criminal charges." It was in the recycling bin. It was being thrown away. "It's still firm property." Pemberton set the phone down on the table, not giving it back. "I should call security right now. Have them escort you out. But I'm going to give you one chance to explain what the hell you think you're doing in this conference room at midnight with our files." Desmond looked at the contract on the table. At page 47 with the unsigned addendum that would save or destroy this case depending on who found it first. At Pemberton, who'd called him illiterate 12 hours ago in front of 23 people. He could walk away. Take the termination. Take the loss. Stay invisible like he'd been for 3 years. Or he could tell the truth and risk everything that truth would cost. "I found an error," Desmond said quietly. Pemberton blinked. "What?" "In the Meridian Tech contract. Page 47, subsection 12b. There's a cross-reference to an addendum that defines force majeure exceptions. The addendum is in the file, but it's only got one signature. Highland's legal team is operating off a complete version with both signatures, which makes their force majeure defense valid. But your version is incomplete, which means you're arguing against terms that were never properly executed. The silence that followed was absolute. Pemberton's face had gone very still. How do you know this? Because I read contracts for 8 years. Because I know what an improperly executed addendum looks like. Because Desmond stopped. Because you what? Because I used to be a lawyer. Pemberton stared at him like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. You're a custodian. Now I am. I wasn't always. This is insane. Pemberton grabbed the contract, flipping to page 47. His finger traced down the page, stopped at subsection 12b. He flipped to the back, found the addendum, stared at the single signature. His hand started shaking. Jesus Christ, he whispered. We've been arguing the wrong version of the contract for 6 weeks. Highland doesn't know that, Desmond said. If you file a motion pointing out the discrepancy, you can argue their entire defense is based on terms that were never finalized. It flips everything. Pemberton looked up at him. Who are you? Someone who needs this job and shouldn't be telling you any of this. Why are you telling me? Desmond thought about the text message on his phone. The offer from Berkowitz and Sullivan. The easy money for information that would destroy Hammond and Associates. He thought about the last 3 years of invisibility, of safety, of survival purchased at the cost of dignity. Because I can't watch this place fail when I know how to save it. Pemberton set the contract down carefully. His hands were still shaking. If you're lying to me. I'm not. If this is some kind of... It's not. Pemberton pulled out his phone. I need to call Hong. Right now. Wait, Desmond said. Pemberton stopped, finger hovering over the screen. What? If you call her, she's going to ask questions. About me. About how I know this. About why a custodian is reading case files at midnight. Desmond met his eyes. I need this job. I have a daughter in nursing school. I have rent. I have a life that works because nobody asks me questions I can't answer. So what are you suggesting? Tell her you found it. Take credit. Save the case. I don't care about recognition. I just need to keep my job. Pemberton stared at him for a long moment. That's what you want? For me to take credit for your work? I want to stay invisible. Why? Because the last time people saw me, I lost everything. Something shifted in Pemberton's expression. Not quite understanding, but maybe the beginning of it. He looked at the contract again, then back at Desmond. I could still fire you. For the photographs. For being in here after hours. I know. I could call Hong and tell her everything. Let her decide what to do with you. I know that too. Pemberton was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up Desmond's phone and deleted the photo of the patent case. Handed it back. Get out of here. Finish your shift. Don't come back to this floor tonight. Desmond took the phone. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, I'll decide if you still work here. Desmond nodded and turned to leave. Wait, Pemberton said. Desmond stopped. This error you found. Are there others? Desmond thought about the 3 other structural problems he'd spotted in Highland's counterclaim. The precedents that would gut their entire argument if someone knew where to look. Yes, he said. How many? Enough to win the case. Pemberton's expression was unreadable. Get out of here. I'll call you tomorrow. Desmond pushed his cart out of the conference room, down the hallway, toward the elevator. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. The message from Berkowitz and Sullivan was still there, unanswered. He should delete it. Should forget any of this happened. Should go back to being invisible before everything collapsed again. But as the elevator doors opened, his phone vibrated again. Another text. Same unknown number. Still interested in that coffee? I'm willing to pay for information. 5 figures if it's good enough. Think about it. The elevator doors started to close. Desmond's hand shot out, stopping them. He stood there, 1 foot in the elevator, 1 foot in the hallway, staring at his phone. Behind him, he could hear Pemberton's voice through the conference room door, urgent and low, talking to someone on the phone. In front of him, the elevator waited to take him away from all of this. And in his hand, an offer that could solve every financial problem he had, at the cost of destroying the firm that had given him a chance when no one else would. Desmond looked at the message for 10 seconds. Then he stepped back into the hallway. The elevator doors closed without him. He pulled up the text thread and started typing a response. Desmond deleted the message without responding. He stood in the hallway for another moment, staring at the blank screen, then pocketed his phone and pushed his cart toward the service elevator. His shift ended in 2 hours. He had bathrooms to clean, trash to empty, a routine to follow. Behind him, Pemberton's voice continued through the conference room door, urgent and low. Desmond didn't look back. He finished his shift at 2 a.m., clocked out, and walked to the bus stop on LaSalle Street. The November wind cut through his jacket. His hands were raw from chemicals and cold water. His back ached from pushing the buffer across marble floors. He felt like himself for the first time in years. At home in his studio apartment in Rogers Park, Desmond microwaved leftover rice and chicken, then sat at the small table by the window and stared at his phone. The message from Berkowitz and Sullivan was gone, but he knew the number. Could still call it. Could still take the meeting. 5 figures for information. He thought about Keisha's tuition, the credit card debt from her textbooks, the rent increase he'd gotten notice about last week. Then he thought about Marcus, the night guard who always said good evening, about the break room coffee pot he shared with the other custodians, about 3 years of stability purchased at the cost of invisibility. He set the phone face down and ate his dinner in silence. The next morning, Desmond woke to 7 missed calls from an unknown number. No voicemails. Just 7 calls between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. At 7:32, his phone rang again. Same number. He answered. Hello. Mr. Clarke. A woman's voice, professional and clipped. This is Catherine Hong. I'm the managing partner at Hammond & Associates. Richard Pemberton gave me your number. I need you to come in today. Now, if possible. Desmond's stomach dropped. My shift doesn't start until 6. This isn't about your custodial duties. I need to speak with you about the Meridian Tech case. Richard tells me you found something. Are you available? This is urgent. Desmond looked at the clock. He had a doctor's appointment at 9. A prescription refill he needed for his blood pressure medication. I can be there by 10. 9:30. My office. She hung up. Desmond sat on the edge of his bed, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. He arrived at Hammond & Associates at 9:23 a.m. wearing the same khakis and button-down shirt he wore to church twice a month. Not a suit. He didn't own a suit anymore. Just clean clothes that were presentable enough to not draw attention. The daytime receptionist didn't recognize him. Can I help you? Catherine Hong asked me to come in. Your name? Desmond Clarke. She typed something, then looked up with an expression that was hard to read. 10th floor. She's expecting you. The 10th floor was executive territory. Desmond had cleaned it hundreds of times, but never during business hours. Now it was full of people, assistants moving between offices, associates talking in hushed clusters, the hum of a workplace in motion. Everyone looked at him as he passed. Not because they recognized him, but because they didn't. Because he was clearly out of place. Hong's office was at the end of the hall. Her assistant, a young man in wire-rimmed glasses, gestured to a chair. "She'll be with you in a moment." Desmond Saturday waited, watched lawyers move past the office door, their faces tight with stress. At 9:41, Hong emerged from an interior door, Pemberton and another man behind her. The man was David Meyer, the lead litigator. Desmond recognized him from the case files. "Mr. Clarke," Hong said. She didn't offer her hand. "Come in." The office was corner-windowed with views of the loop. Hong sat behind her desk. Pemberton and Meyer stood flanking her like sentries. "Richard tells me you found an error in the Meridian Tech contract," Hong said. "A significant error that we've been missing for 6 weeks." Desmond nodded. "He also tells me you're a former attorney." "Yes. Morrison and Webb," he said. "IP and contract law." "That's correct." "Why are you working as a custodian?" There it was. The question Desmond had been avoiding for 3 years. The question that had no good answer. "The 2008 recession," he said simply. "I lost my position. Couldn't find another one. This job was available when I needed it." Hong studied him for a long moment. "Richard showed me the error you found. The unsigned addendum. If you're right, if Highland's defense is based on terms that were never properly executed, this changes the entire case." "I'm right." "You sound very certain." "I am." Meyer spoke for the first time. "How did you find this?" "We've had 5 associates review this contract. I found it in the recycling bin 4 days ago. Read it during my break." "You read a 73-page contract during your break." "I used to read contracts for a living." Meyer's expression shifted. Not quite respect, but something close to acknowledgement. "Can you explain the other errors Richard mentioned?" Desmond spent the next 20 minutes walking them through Highland's counterclaim. The 3 structural problems, the precedents that would undermine their arguments, the procedural issues that could be exploited. He didn't have notes. Didn't need them. The case was mapped in his head the way all cases used to be. When he finished, the room was silent. Hong looked at Pemberton. "Why didn't we see this?" "Because we were looking at the wrong question," Meyer said quietly. "We were trying to prove they breached. We should have been trying to prove their defense was invalid." He looked at Desmond. "This is exceptional work." "It's just contract law," Desmond said. "No," Hong said. "It's more than that. This could save the firm." Desmond said nothing. Hong leaned forward. "Meridian Tech is meeting with Berkowitz and Sullivan tomorrow morning. If they like what they hear, we lose the client. But if we can present this new strategy first, if we can show them we found a path to victory, we might keep them." "That's why you called me in." "Yes. I need you to write up an analysis. Everything you just told us, in memo form. Legal precedents, procedural arguments, the works. Can you do that?" Desmond thought about the offer he deleted last night. The 5 figures for information. The easy path he'd rejected. "Why would you trust me to do this?" "Because Richard says you're right. And if you're right, you might be the only person who can save this case." "I'm a custodian." "You're an attorney who's been working as a custodian," Hong corrected. "There's a difference." "Not to anyone else in this building." Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. Hong's expression didn't change. "I'm offering you a chance," she said. "Write the memo. If it's as good as what you just presented, we'll discuss your future here. If it's not, you go back to your shift and we never speak of this again. And if I say no, then we lose the case, the client, and possibly the firm. And you lose your job when we have to make cuts." Hong's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "So I suppose the question is, are you willing to help us?" Desmond looked at Pemberton, who wouldn't meet his eyes. At Meyer, who was watching him with something that might have been curiosity. At Hong, who was offering him something that looked like an opportunity but felt like a trap. I need to think about it, Desmond said. You have until tomorrow morning, Hong said. The client meeting is at 9 a.m. If you're going to write this memo, I need it by 8. Desmond stood. I'll let you know. He walked out of the office, past the assistant, down the hall toward the elevator. Behind him, he could hear voices, Hong and Pemberton arguing about something, Maya's quieter interjection. The elevator doors opened. Desmond stepped inside. As they started to close, he heard running footsteps. Pemberton's hand shot through, stopping the doors. He stepped into the elevator, breathing hard. Wait. The doors closed. The elevator descended. I didn't tell her about the photographs, Pemberton said. Or about you being in the conference room after hours. Or about Berkowitz and Sullivan contacting you. Desmond turned slowly. How did you? I'm not stupid. A custodian with a law degree gets contacted by our biggest competitor the same day our most important case is falling apart? That's not coincidence. Pemberton's voice was low, urgent. They offered you money, didn't they? For information. Desmond said nothing. Did you take it? No. Why not? Because I don't betray people who gave me a chance. We didn't give you a chance. We gave you a mop and a bucket and told you to be invisible. It was more than anyone else offered. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Neither of them moved. If you write this memo, Pemberton said quietly, everything changes. People will know who you are. They'll ask questions. About why you're here. About what happened to you. About, he stopped. About why someone like me ended up like this. Yes. And that bothers you. It should bother you. Desmond stepped out of the elevator. Pemberton followed. You called me illiterate, Desmond said. In front of 23 people. You looked at me like I was something you'd scraped off your shoe. Now you're asking me to save your career. I'm not asking you to save my career. Hong is asking you to save the firm. What's the difference? The difference is 200 people who work here, who have families, who need their jobs just like you need yours. Pemberton's jaw was tight. I was wrong about you. Is that what you want to hear? Fine. I was wrong. But if you let this firm fail because you're angry at me. I'm not angry at you, Desmond said. I'm just tired. He walked toward the exit. Pemberton called after him. Clarke. Wait. Desmond stopped but didn't turn around. If you write the memo, Pemberton said, I'll tell Hong everything. About Berkowitz and Sullivan. About the photographs. About all of it. Because if you're going to save this firm, you need to do it clean. No leverage. No secrets. Just the work. Desmond turned. That would get me fired. Maybe. Or maybe it would show her you had chances to betray us and didn't. That you chose loyalty over money. That you're worth trusting. Pemberton's expression was unreadable. Your choice. But if you write that memo, I'm telling her everything tomorrow morning. Before the client meeting. Why? Because if we're going to trust you, we need to know you're trustworthy. And the only way to know that is to put all the cards on the table. Desmond stared at him for a long moment. Then he pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the cold November morning. His phone buzzed. A text from Keisha. Hey Dad. Can we talk today? Need your advice on something. Desmond stood on the sidewalk, people flowing around him like water around a stone, and stared at his daughter's message. Then he pulled up his contacts and found Catherine Hong's number. His finger hovered over the call button. Desmond didn't call Catherine Hong. Instead, he called his daughter. Keisha answered on the second ring. Dad? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, baby. You said you needed advice. They talked for 47 minutes. About her clinical rotation at Grady Memorial. About a patient who'd reminded her of her grandmother. About a doctor who'd asked her if she was really sure she wanted to be a nurse, as if the question itself wasn't insulting. "What did you say?" Desmond asked. "I said yes, I'm sure. Then I went and did my job better than he could have done it." She paused. "You taught me that. Remember? When I was in high school and that guidance counselor said I should think about realistic career goals." Desmond remembered. He'd been unemployed at the time, living in the shelter, but he'd made the trip to Atlanta anyway. Sat across from that counselor and asked her to define realistic for a 17-year-old with a 3.9 GPA. "I remember," he said quietly. "You told me that other people's doubt was just noise. That the only opinion that mattered was mine and God's. So that's what I told myself when that doctor looked at me like I didn't belong there." After they hung up, Desmond sat on the sidewalk outside Hammond & Associates and stared at nothing. Then he went home and started writing. He worked for 11 hours straight. No breaks except to use the bathroom and microwave instant ramen at 3 a.m. His fingers cramped. His eyes burned. His back screamed from hunching over his laptop at the small kitchen table. But the memo came together like pieces of a puzzle he'd been solving in his head for weeks. The unsigned addendum. The force majeure provision. The 3 structural flaws in Hyland's counterclaim. The precedents from similar cases in the 7th Circuit. The procedural arguments that would force Hyland to defend their defense rather than attack Meridian Tech's position. By 6 a.m., he had 19 pages of legal analysis that felt sharper than anything he'd written at Morrison & Webb. At 7:30 a.m., he emailed it to Catherine Hong with a subject line that just said, "Meridian Tech Analysis, D. Clarke." Then he took a shower, put on his cleanest khakis and button-down, and headed back to Hammond & Associates. He arrived at 8:47 a.m. The 10th floor was chaos. Associates running between offices with files and laptops. Paralegals setting up a conference room. Someone on a phone call saying they'll be here in 10 minutes with rising panic in their voice. Hong's assistant saw Desmond and immediately stood. "She's been looking for you. Go in." Hong's office had 5 people in it. Hong behind her desk. Maya and 2 associates at the conference table. Pemberton standing by the window. They all turned when Desmond entered. "You sent the memo at 7:33 this morning," Hong said without preamble. "I've read it twice. David's read it. We've both flagged sections for the client presentation." She gestured to the empty chair at the conference table. "Sit." Desmond Saturday. Maya pushed a marked-up printout across the table. "This is exceptional work. The precedent citations alone would have taken our associates days to compile. You did it overnight." "I knew where to look," Desmond said. "That's not just knowing where to look. That's understanding the architecture of the argument." Maya leaned forward. "The way you framed the force majeure issue, turning their strongest defense into evidence of procedural bad faith, that sophisticated legal strategy." Hong was watching Desmond carefully. "Richard told me about Berkowitz and Sullivan." The room went very still. Desmond's jaw tightened. He looked at Pemberton, who was staring out the window, refusing to meet his eyes. "He told me they contacted you," Hong continued. "Offered you money for information. And that you declined." "Yes. He also told me about the photographs on your phone. The files you've been reading during your breaks. The fact that you've essentially been conducting unauthorized legal research using our confidential documents for months." Desmond said nothing. There was nothing to say. "That's grounds for immediate termination and possibly legal action," Hong said. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "You understand that?" "Yes. So explain to me why I shouldn't fire you right now, before the client arrives." Desmond looked at her steadily. "Because I can help you win this case. Because I chose loyalty over money when it would have been easier not to. And because you asked me to write a memo that could save this firm, and I did." You also violated confidentiality protocols and accessed privileged information without authorization. I read documents from the recycling bin, documents that were being thrown away. That's still firm property. Then fire me. But fire me after the client meeting. Let me at least see if the work matters. One of the associates at the table shifted uncomfortably. Maya was watching the exchange with an expression Desmond couldn't read. Hong was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood. You'll sit in on the client meeting. At the back of the room. You won't speak unless I ask you a direct question. Understood? Yes. After the meeting, we'll discuss your future here. If we still have a future here. She checked her watch. They'll be here in 6 minutes. David, are we ready? We're ready, Maya said. Hong looked at Pemberton. Richard. Pemberton finally turned from the window. His face was unreadable. We're ready. Hong's eyes moved to Desmond. And you? Are you ready to be visible? Desmond thought about 12 years of invisibility, of keeping his head down, of surviving by being forgettable. Then he thought about Keisha telling him that other people's doubt was just noise. Yes, he said. The Meridian Tech executives arrived at 9:03 a.m. 3 of them, the CEO, the general counsel, and their outside litigation consultant. They settled into the main conference room with the grim expressions of people who'd already made their decision and were just being polite about announcing it. Hong made introductions. Maya presented the analysis. Pemberton fielded questions about timing and procedure. Desmond sat in a chair against the back wall, hands folded in his lap, trying to be invisible one last time. But halfway through Maya's presentation, the general counsel interrupted. This is impressive work. Really. But it's also exactly what Berkowitz and Sullivan pitched us yesterday. She looked at Hong. They told us about the unsigned addendum. About the force majeure defense being potentially invalid. They offered to take the case on contingency because they were confident they could win it. The room went cold. Hong's expression didn't change, but Desmond saw her fingers tighten on her pen. They couldn't have known about the addendum, Maya said carefully. We only discovered it 2 days ago. Then someone told them, the general counsel said. And frankly, if your own team is leaking strategy to competitors, that's a bigger problem than Highland Industries. Hong looked at Pemberton. Pemberton looked at Maya. Maya looked at the associates. Everyone was looking at everyone except Desmond. Then the CEO spoke for the first time. Who actually found this error? Because Berkowitz said they'd had someone review your case files and spotted it immediately. They made you sound incompetent. So I'd like to know who on your team is competent enough to find the same thing they did. The silence stretched. Hong turned in her chair. Mr. Clarke, would you come here, please? Desmond stood slowly. Every eye in the room followed him as he walked from the back wall to the conference table. Mr. Clarke is the person who found the error, Hong said. He identified it 4 days ago. The general counsel looked at Desmond, then at Hong. Is he a new associate? No, Hong said. His. I'm a custodian, Desmond said quietly. I work night maintenance. I found the contract in the recycling bin and read it during my break. The room erupted. You're telling me a janitor found an error your entire legal team missed? The CEO's voice was sharp, disbelieving. I'm a former attorney, Desmond said. Northwestern Law, class of '98. I worked in IP and contract law for 8 years before the recession. I've been cleaning offices here for 3 years, but I still read cases when I find them. The general counsel leaned back in her chair. This is what you want us to believe. That your custodian, who just happens to be a lawyer, found a critical error that saves your case, and Berkowitz and Sullivan coincidentally found the same thing. It's not coincidence, Pemberton said suddenly. Berkowitz contacted him, offered him money for information. He declined and came to us instead. Every head turned toward Desmond. "Is that true?" the CEO asked. Desmond felt the weight of the room pressing down on him. Felt 12 years of invisibility about to shatter. Felt the careful life he'd built threatening to collapse again. "Yes, sir," he said. "How much did they offer?" "5 figures. I don't know the exact amount. I deleted the message." "Why?" "Because betraying people who gave me a chance isn't who I am." The general counsel exchanged a look with the CEO. Then she turned to Hong. "If what you're telling me is true, if Berkowitz and Sullivan obtained this strategy by approaching your employee and he refused them, then they pitched us stolen work." "That would be my assessment," Hong said carefully. "Which means they're not just competitors. They're unethical competitors." The general counsel pulled out her phone. "I need to make a call." She left the room. The CEO and the consultant followed. Hong, Maya, Pemberton, the associates, and Desmond sat in silence. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. Then 7. At 9 minutes, the door opened. The general counsel came back in alone. Her expression was unreadable. "We're not switching firms," she said. "But we're also not comfortable moving forward with the current team structure." She looked directly at Desmond. "We want him on the case. Officially. Whatever role makes sense. If he found this error, he might find others. And frankly, after what Berkowitz tried to pull, we need people we can trust." Hong's face remained perfectly calm. "Mr. Clarke isn't currently an attorney with this firm." "Then make him one. Or make him a consultant. Or make him whatever you need to make him." The general counsel's voice was firm. "But if we're staying with Hammond and Associates, he needs to be part of the team. That's non-negotiable." She left again. The door closed. Desmond stood frozen at the conference table, aware of every eye on him. Hong spoke first. "Well, that's unexpected." "That's insane," one of the associates muttered. Maya was smiling slightly. "That's justice." Pemberton was still staring at Desmond like he'd never seen him before. Hong stood. Everyone out except Clarke and Richard. "Now." The room emptied quickly. The door closed. Hong walked to the window, hands clasped behind her back. Pemberton stayed by the conference table. Desmond remained standing, uncertain, waiting. "You put me in an impossible position," Hong said without turning around. "The client wants you on the case. But you violated firm protocols. You accessed confidential information. And you've been working here under false pretenses for 3 years." "I never lied about who I was," Desmond said. "No one asked." "No," Hong agreed. "We didn't ask. We just assumed." She turned to face him. "But now I need to ask. If I give you this opportunity, if I bring you onto this case officially, can you handle being visible again? Because once this happens, everyone will know. Everyone will have questions. Everyone will wonder how someone with your credentials ended up mopping floors." "Let them wonder," Desmond said quietly. "It won't be that simple." "I know." Hong studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Pemberton. "Richard, you started this. You found him in the conference room. You brought me the information. What do you think we should do?" Pemberton was silent for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I think he's earned a chance. I think he chose integrity when it cost him something. And I think if we don't give him this opportunity, we're making the same mistake twice." Hong nodded slowly. Then she turned back to Desmond. "I'll need to speak with the executive committee. But assuming they approve, I'm offering you a contract consultant position. 60 days. You'll work exclusively on the Meridian Tech case. If it goes well, we'll discuss something more permanent. If it doesn't..." She trailed off. "If it doesn't, I go back to mopping floors," Desmond finished. "Yes." Desmond thought about the studio apartment in Rogers Park, about Keisha in Atlanta, about 3 years of stability purchased at the cost of dignity, about the man in the blue uniform who'd learned to be invisible. And he thought about the memo he'd written at 3 a.m. that reminded him who he used to be. "I'll need 2 weeks' notice on my custodial position," he said. "Marcus and the other guys on night crew shouldn't have to cover my shifts without warning." Hong's expression softened slightly. "That's..." The door burst open. The general counsel stood there, phone in hand, face pale. "We have a problem," she said. "Berkowitz and Sullivan just filed an emergency motion claiming Hammond and Associates stole their legal strategy. They're alleging that someone at your firm acquired their work product and used it in this morning's presentation." Hong's face went white. "That's impossible. They have timestamps, emails, a paper trail showing they developed this strategy first." The general counsel's voice was shaking. "They're asking for sanctions against your firm and removal from the case. The hearing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. She looked at Desmond. "And they're naming you specifically as the person who stole it." The emergency motion landed like a bomb. Desmond stood in Hong's office, staring at the document the general counsel had pulled up on her phone. His name was there in black and white: Desmond Clarke, acting in concert with Hammond and Associates, knowingly misappropriated legal work product developed by Berkowitz and Sullivan LLP. "This is insane," Maya said. "We developed that strategy independently. Desmond found the error days before they claimed they did." "Can you prove that?" the general counsel asked. The room went silent. "The memo I sent this morning is time-stamped," Desmond said. 7:33 a.m. Whatever they filed had to come after that. "Their motion says they emailed their strategy to Meridian Tech at 11 p.m. last night," the general counsel said. 8 hours before your memo. They're claiming you had access to their work and copied it." "That's impossible," Hong said. Desmond wasn't even... She stopped. Everyone knew what she'd been about to say. Desmond wasn't even an attorney here. He was a custodian, which meant he had access to offices after hours, to trash bins and recycling, to documents left on desks when everyone went home. The general counsel's expression said she'd reached the same conclusion. "I need to see everything. Every draft, every note, every piece of evidence showing you developed this independently. And I need it before tomorrow's hearing, or Meridian Tech is pulling out of both firms and handling this in-house." She left without waiting for a response. Hong turned to Desmond. Her face was very still. "Did you have any contact with Berkowitz and Sullivan beyond that initial text?" "No." "Did you discuss this case with anyone outside this firm?" "No." "Did you access any documents or communications from their firm in any way?" "No." Desmond's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "I found the error in your recycling bin. I wrote the memo from memory and research. That's the truth." Hong studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Maya. "David, I need you and Clarke to reconstruct everything. Every step of his analysis. Every source he used. Every moment from when he found that contract to when he sent the memo. If there's any gap, any uncertainty, any possibility they're right." "They're not right," Maya said. "Then prove it." Hong's voice was sharp. "You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow. That gives us 6 hours before the hearing to review your work and prepare a response." She looked at Desmond. "Can you do this?" Desmond thought about 12 years of rebuilding his life. About 3 years of stability. About the job offer Hong had made 15 minutes ago that now felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. "Yes, he said. They set up in a small conference room on the 8th floor. Desmond, Maya, and 2 associates named Sarah Chen and Marcus Okoye. The associates had the wary expressions of people who'd been told to work with someone but weren't sure if that someone was a genius or a fraud. Maya spread Desmond's memo across the table alongside printouts of Berkowitz and Sullivan's motion. Walk us through it, Maya said. Everything. Start with finding the contract. Desmond started talking. About emptying Pemberton's recycling bin on Tuesday night. About seeing the Meridian Tech case name. About taking the contract to the break room during his 2 a.m. lunch break and reading it cover to cover. Wait, Sarah interrupted. You read a 73-page contract during a 30-minute break. I didn't finish it. I got through about 40 pages. Enough to see the cross-reference to the addendum. And you remembered that? Days later. I remember everything I read, Desmond said quietly. It's how my brain works. Always has. Marcus was flipping through the Berkowitz motion. They cite the same precedents you do. Reynolds versus Caterpillar. Hansen Industries versus Marshall. The Seventh Circuit trilogy on force majeure interpretation. Those are the foundational cases for this kind of argument, Desmond said. Anyone doing proper research would find them. But you found them in what, 11 hours? While working from home. I worked for 8 years in contract law. I knew where to look. Sarah was reading his memo with growing intensity. The way you structured this, leading with the procedural argument before the substantive one, that sophisticated strategy. Most associates would have gone straight for the unsigned addendum. The procedural argument creates urgency, Desmond said. It forces Highland to respond quickly, which increases the chance they'll make mistakes. The substantive argument is stronger, but it takes longer to develop. You lead with speed, follow with substance. Maya was nodding slowly. That's exactly right. That's, he stopped, looking at Desmond with an expression that might have been respect. How long has it been since you practiced? 13 years. And you still think like this? I never stopped thinking like this. I just stopped having anywhere to use it. They worked through the night, comparing every citation, every argument, every structural choice. Sarah pulled up the Westlaw search history on Desmond's borrowed laptop, the one Hong had given him at 9 p.m. so he could work. Marcus cross-referenced the timestamps on every document. By 2 a.m., they had a timeline that showed Desmond's research starting at 10:47 p.m. the night before, nearly 12 hours after Berkowitz claimed to have emailed their strategy to Meridian Tech. This doesn't prove you didn't see their work, Sarah said carefully. It just proves you did yours after they did theirs. Unless they're lying about their timestamp, Marcus said. Why would they lie? Sarah asked. What do they gain? A $7 million client, Maya said. And the satisfaction of destroying a competitor who rejected their recruitment offer. Everyone turned to look at him. Maya pulled out his phone and opened an email. I did some digging while you were working. Berkowitz and Sullivan contacted 4 people at this firm in the last 6 months, trying to poach talent. 3 associates and 1 partner. All of them said no. He looked at Desmond. Did they contact you before that text about the coffee meeting? I don't know. I'm not exactly on the legal radar. Desmond stopped. I was a custodian. But you used to work at Morrison and Webb, Maya said. Which means you're in the alumni directory. Which means anyone searching for attorneys with IP and contract experience would find your name. He turned his laptop around. Look at this. It was a LinkedIn page. Desmond's LinkedIn page. He'd set it up in 2009 and abandoned it by 2010. The last update was from July 2009, seeking new opportunities in IP and contract law. Below that was a message request from 3 weeks ago. From a partner at Berkowitz and Sullivan named James Mitchell. Mr. Clarke, I see you have extensive experience in contract disputes. We're looking for someone with your background. Would love to discuss opportunities. Please reach out at your earliest convenience. Desmond stared at the message. I never saw this. I haven't logged into LinkedIn in years. But they reached out, Maya said. 3 weeks ago. Right when the Meridian Tech case was starting to fall apart. He looked at the others. What if they didn't develop this strategy independently? What if they knew Hammond and Associates were struggling, found out we had a former attorney working here who might be vulnerable, and tried to recruit him for information? That's speculation, Sarah said. It's a theory, Maya corrected. And it's one we can investigate. He pulled up another screen. I have a friend at the clerk's office. I can find out exactly when Berkowitz filed their email to Meridian Tech. If there's any discrepancy between what they claim and what actually happened. His phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up looking pale. That was my friend. Berkowitz and Sullivan's email to Meridian Tech? It was backdated. They sent it at 6:47 a.m. this morning, 46 minutes before Desmond sent his memo. But they modified the metadata to make it look like it was sent at 11 p.m. last night. The room erupted. That's fraud, Marcus said. That's disbarment, Sarah added. That's proof, Maya said. He looked at Desmond. They saw your memo at 7:33 a.m., realized you'd found the same strategy they were planning to pitch, rushed out their own version, and then filed a motion claiming you stole from them. They're not protecting their work. They're trying to steal yours. Desmond sat very still. How do we prove it? Email metadata, Maya said. If the clerk's office has the original file, we can show it was altered. But we need a court order to access it, which means we need to file our own emergency motion tonight, and we need to convince a judge to grant us discovery access before tomorrow's hearing. He looked at his watch. It was 2:37 a.m. We have 5.5 hours to write a motion, file it, and pray a judge is available to review it before 8 a.m. Maya looked at Desmond. Can you write something that compelling in 5 hours? Desmond thought about the motion that had his name on it, that accused him of theft, that threatened everything he'd been trying to rebuild. Yes, he said. They worked straight through until dawn. Desmond wrote while the others researched, cited, formatted. Sarah made coffee runs every 90 minutes. Marcus called in favors with clerk's office staff to find out which judges would be available for emergency reviews. By 6:15 a.m., they had a 32-page motion arguing that Berkowitz and Sullivan had engaged in fraud, that their email had been backdated, and that Hammond and Associates deserved discovery access to prove it. Maya filed it electronically at 6:43 a.m. At 7:02 a.m., Desmond's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Hello. Mr. Clarke. A woman's voice, cool and professional. This is Rebecca Torres. I'm a partner at Berkowitz and Sullivan. I think we should talk before today's hearing. There's been a misunderstanding that I believe we can resolve privately. Desmond put the phone on speaker. Maya, Sarah, and Marcus gathered around. What kind of misunderstanding? Desmond asked. We're prepared to withdraw our motion. We're also prepared to offer you a position here, senior contract consultant, 6-figure salary, full benefits. All you need to do is confirm that you did not develop your analysis independently, that you had access to our work product through your position at Hammond and Associates and used it to inform your memo. The room was dead silent. You want me to confess to theft, Desmond said. We want you to acknowledge the reality of the situation. You work as a custodian. You have access to privileged information. It's not unreasonable to assume you've seen things you weren't supposed to see. And if I don't? Then we proceed with the hearing. We expose everything about your background. We make sure every firm in Chicago knows that Hammond and Associates employs a disbarred attorney. I'm not disbarred, Desmond said. An attorney in disciplinary limbo, then. An attorney who couldn't maintain his career and has been working as a janitor for 3 years while secretly accessing confidential files. Do you think that's the person Hammond and Associates want representing them? Desmond looked at Maya, who was shaking his head urgently. I'll need time to think about it, Desmond said. You have until 8 a.m. That's 53 minutes. Call me back with your answer, or we'll see you in court. She hung up. Maya grabbed Desmond's arm. "You can't seriously be considering." "I'm not," Desmond said. "But I need to know something first." He looked at Sarah. "Can you pull up my bar status? Right now." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. 30 seconds later, her face went white. "Desmond," she said quietly, "your law license. It's not active." "I know. I never renewed it after." "No. It's not inactive. It's suspended." She turned the laptop around. "Pending disciplinary review for failure to complete continuing education requirements and failure to pay bar dues for 5 consecutive years. The suspension went into effect in 2015. Desmond stared at the screen. "That's impossible. I let it lapse. That's different from suspension." "Not in Illinois," Marcus said, reading over Sarah's shoulder. "If you don't formally withdraw from bar membership and you stop paying dues, they automatically move you to suspended status after 3 years. You'd need to petition for reinstatement before you could practice again." "How long does reinstatement take?" Maya asked. "Months," Sarah said. "Sometimes longer. And that's assuming they approve it." Maya's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then at Desmond. "The judge just responded to our motion. She's willing to review it, but only if the attorney of record appears in person at 8 a.m. to answer questions." He paused. "I'm not admitted in federal court. Neither are Sarah or Marcus. Which means I need to appear," Desmond finished. "In front of a federal judge. With a suspended law license. To argue a motion that could save or destroy this entire case." "If Berkowitz finds out you're suspended," Sarah said quietly, "they'll use it to destroy your credibility. They'll say you've been practicing law without a license. That everything you've done is invalid." "But if I don't appear," Desmond said, "the judge won't hear our motion. Which means Berkowitz's fraud goes unchallenged." His phone buzzed. A text from Hong. "Status? The hearing is at 2 p.m. I need to know if we have a defense." Desmond looked at Maya. "What happens if I appear in front of the judge and she finds out I'm suspended?" "Best case? She allows you to proceed as a pro se litigant. Worst case? She sanctions you for an authorized practice of law and refers you to the disciplinary board. And if I don't appear?" Hammond and Associates loses the case, loses the client, and possibly loses its license to practice. Because Berkowitz's accusations go unopposed. Desmond closed his eyes. 51 minutes until he had to give Berkowitz an answer. 23 minutes until he had to be in front of a federal judge. Behind him, the conference room door opened. Catherine Hong walked in, followed by Richard Pemberton. "We need to talk," Hong said. Her face was grave. "Now." Hong closed the conference room door behind her. Pemberton stayed by the entrance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I just got off the phone with the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission," Hong said. "Checking your bar status." Desmond's stomach dropped. I can explain." "You don't need to explain. I know what happened. You let your license lapse in 2010. You didn't formally withdraw, so it converted to administrative suspension in 2013. You've been suspended for 12 years. She paused. "Which means every piece of legal work you've done for this firm in the last 48 hours was an authorized practice of law." The room was silent except for the hum of the heating system. "However," Hong continued, "you weren't representing yourself as an attorney. You were employed as a custodian who happened to provide strategic advice. That's not practice of law. That's consultation. And consultation doesn't require a license." Maya exhaled audibly. "But if you appear in front of Judge Morrison in 20 minutes, Hong said, "that changes everything. You'd be representing the firm in federal court. That's absolutely an authorized practice. Berkowitz would have grounds to destroy you, this firm, And this case? She looked at Desmond steadily. So you're not going to appear? Then who will? Desmond asked. I will, Pemberton said from the doorway. Everyone turned. I'm admitted in federal court, Pemberton continued. I'll argue the motion. David will sit second chair. He looked at Desmond. You'll be there as a consultant, not an attorney, just someone who helped prepare the brief. Berkowitz will still try to discredit him, Sarah said. Let them try, Pemberton said. His voice was cold, controlled. Because when they do, we'll point out that they attempted to bribe a firm employee, fabricated evidence, and backdated documents to commit fraud. Desmond's bar status becomes irrelevant when they're facing potential disbarment themselves. Hong nodded slowly. Richard's right. We go on offense. Make this about their misconduct, not Desmond's credentials. She checked her watch. We have 17 minutes. Let's move. The federal courthouse was 8 blocks away. They took 2 cars, Hong and Pemberton in one, Desmond and Maya in the other. No one spoke during the drive. Judge Sarah Morrison's chambers were on the 4th floor. Her clerk ushered them into a cramped office lined with law books and case files. Morrison herself was in her late 50s, grey hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed their motion. This is a serious allegation, she said without looking up. You're accusing a respected firm of fabricating evidence and filing a fraudulent motion. Yes, Your Honor, Pemberton said. And we can prove it if you grant us access to the original email metadata. Mr. Pemberton, I've known James Mitchell at Berkowitz and Sullivan for 15 years. He's aggressive, but he's not dishonest. Morrison finally looked up. What makes you so certain he would risk his career like this? Because he's desperate, Desmond said quietly. Everyone looked at him. Morrison's eyes narrowed. And you are? Desmond Clarke, Your Honor. I'm a consultant with Hammond and Associates. I wrote the analysis that Berkowitz claims was stolen from them. You're the custodian, Morrison said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You worked at Morrison and Webb 15 years ago. I remember the Techstream patent case. You were sharp. She set down her reading glasses. What happened? The 2008 recession happened. I lost my position and couldn't find another one. Eventually I stopped looking and started surviving. Desmond met her eyes. But I never stopped being a lawyer. I just stopped having a license to practice. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Your license is suspended. Yes. So anything you've written for this firm is an authorized practice of law? No, Your Honor, Pemberton interjected. Mr. Clarke provided strategic consultation. He didn't represent the firm or hold himself out as an attorney. He was an employee who offered advice based on his background. Advice that saved your most important case, Morrison said dryly. Yes, Your Honor. Morrison leaned back in her chair. I'm going to grant limited discovery. You'll have access to the email metadata from Berkowitz's submission. If it's been altered, we'll address that. If it hasn't, if they develop their strategy independently and you're wasting this court's time, I'll sanction your firm and refer Mr. Clarke to the Disciplinary Commission for an authorized practice. Understood, Your Honor, Hong said. You have until noon. My clerk will coordinate access with the technology department. Morrison looked at Desmond. Mr. Clarke, a word of advice. If you want to practice law again, petition for reinstatement. Don't skulk around in the shadows offering consultation. It's beneath you. Yes, Desmond said quietly. They had the metadata analysis by 10:47 a.m. The forensic report was damning. Berkowitz and Sullivan's email had been created at 6:52 a.m., 5 minutes after Desmond sent his memo, and the timestamp had been manually altered to show 11:04 p.m. the previous night. At 11:30 a.m., Judge Morrison called both firms into her courtroom for an emergency hearing. James Mitchell from Berkowitz and Sullivan arrived with 3 associates and the kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged. He shook hands with Hong like they were old colleagues, nodded politely to Pemberton, and ignored Desmond entirely. The hearing lasted 11 minutes. Morrison presented the forensic report. Mitchell's face went from confident to confused to pale in the span of 30 seconds. He tried to argue that it was an administrative error, that the timestamp must have changed during the upload process, that there was some reasonable explanation. Morrison cut him off. "Mr. Mitchell, you filed a sworn motion accusing opposing counsel of theft. That motion was based on fabricated evidence. Do you understand the severity of this?" Mitchell opened his mouth, then closed it. "I'm referring this matter to the Disciplinary Commission," Morrison continued. "Your firm's emergency motion is denied with prejudice. Hammond and Associates' motion for sanctions is granted. You'll pay their legal fees and costs associated with defending against your frivolous claims." She looked at Mitchell over her reading glasses. "And Mr. Mitchell, don't appear in my courtroom again until this disciplinary matter is resolved." Mitchell left without a word. His associates followed like mourners at a funeral. Desmond stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, listening to Hong on the phone with the Meridian Tech General Counsel, explaining what had happened. Pemberton was leaning against the wall nearby, tie loosened, exhaustion carved into his face. "You saved us," Pemberton said quietly. "Again. I just told the truth. You did more than that. You refused a bribe. You worked all night to defend a firm that treated you like you were invisible. You put your name on a motion knowing it would expose everything about your past." Pemberton was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong about you. In every possible way. I know. And I'm sorry. For the conference room. For calling you," he stopped. "For all of it." Desmond looked at him steadily. "You were scared. You saw someone who didn't fit your idea of what a lawyer should look like, so you decided I couldn't be one. I understand that. I've been living with versions of that my whole career. That doesn't make it right." "No, it doesn't. But apology accepted." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Hong finished her call and walked over. "Meridian Tech wants to move forward," she said. "They're impressed with how we handled this. They're also impressed with you, Mr. Clarke." She paused. "I spoke with the executive committee this morning. We'd like to offer you a position. Not as a contract consultant. As an attorney, pending reinstatement of your bar license." Desmond blinked. That could take months." "Then we'll wait. In the meantime, you'll work as a legal analyst. Same responsibilities, different title. Once your license is reinstated, we'll transition you to full associate status." Hong's expression softened slightly. "We owe you that much. More than that, honestly." "I appreciate it," Desmond said. "But I need 2 weeks to finish out my custodial position properly. Marcus and the night crew deserve notice." Hong smiled. "That's the most dignified answer I've heard all year. 2 weeks. Then we'll get you an office." 3 months later, Desmond Clarke walked into Hammond & Associates at 9:15 a.m. wearing a suit he'd bought at a consignment shop in Lincoln Park. Not expensive, but clean and professional and his. The receptionist smiled at him. "Good morning, Mr. Clarke." "Good morning, Jennifer." He took the elevator to the 8th floor, walked past associates who now nodded in greeting, and stopped at the office that had his name on the door. Not a corner office. Just a small space with a window overlooking LaSalle Street, a desk, a computer, and a bookshelf he'd already started filling with contracts casebooks. His bar license had been reinstated 2 weeks earlier. The reinstatement hearing had been surprisingly straightforward. The committee had reviewed his work on the Meridian Tech case, noted Judge Morrison's comments about his competence, and decided that his 13-year suspension was punishment enough for administrative oversight. He was a lawyer again. Officially, legally, visibly. On his desk was a framed photo Keisha had sent him. The two of them at her nursing school graduation last month. She'd flown him to Atlanta for it, insisted he stay at her apartment, introduced him to her friends as my dad, the attorney. The pride in her voice had been worth more than any salary. There was a knock on his door. Maya poked his head in. Morning. Got a minute? New contract just came in. Looks like a mess. Could use your eyes on it. Yeah, I've got time, Desmond said. He grabbed a legal pad and followed Maya down the hallway. As they walked, he caught his reflection in one of the glass-walled conference rooms. A 52-year-old black man in a decent suit, legal pad under his arm, walking through a law firm like he belonged there. Because he did. Not because of where he'd been or what he'd lost or how far he'd fallen, but because he'd kept his skills sharp in the dark, chosen integrity over easy money, and refused to let shame define him. In the break room, Marcus from the night custodial crew was refilling the coffee machine. They'd kept him on part-time to help pay for his daughter's school. He saw Desmond and grinned. Yo, Mr. Clarke. You see the memo Hong sent around about the Meridian Tech settlement? 7.2 million. We keeping the lights on for another year. I saw it, Desmond said. And they gave you co-counsel credit. That's wild. Man, you really came up. Desmond smiled. We both did. How's your daughter's sophomore year? Good. Good. She might make Dean's List. They talked for a few more minutes while Marcus finished with the coffee. Then Desmond continued to the conference room where Maya was waiting. As he walked, he passed Pemberton's office. Pemberton was on the phone but looked up and nodded. A real nod. One person acknowledging another. Desmond nodded back. In the conference room, Maya spread out the new contract. Client's a tech startup. They signed this vendor agreement without reading it. Now they're locked into payment terms they can't afford. Desmond scanned the first page. His eyes found the problematic clause immediately. Page 7, subsection 4C. There's an ambiguity in the renewal language. If we can argue that it creates a good faith dispute about the payment schedule, we might be able to renegotiate, Maya finished. That's what I was thinking. Can you draft a memo? Yeah. I'll have it to you by end of day. Maya smiled. You know, when I first heard we'd hired a custodian as a lawyer, I thought it was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. And now I think it's the best decision this firm ever made. After Maya left, Desmond sat alone in the conference room for a moment. He looked out the window at downtown Chicago, the same city where he'd lost everything, the same streets he'd walked as a broken man trying to figure out how to survive. He thought about the shelter on West Madison, about the day labor jobs, about 12 years of being invisible because being seen had cost him too much. And he thought about the yellow mop bucket, about late nights reading case files in an empty break room, about the choice to knock on a conference room door instead of staying silent. His phone buzzed. A text from Keisha. Just got my first paycheck as an RN. Taking you to dinner next time you're in Atlanta. Somewhere nice. You deserve it, Dad. Desmond smiled and typed back. Proud of you. Love you. Then he picked up his legal pad and started writing the memo. Just another day. Just another contract. Just another problem to solve. But this time, he was solving it as himself. Visible. Valued. Home. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to turn on notifications, so you're notified every time I release a great story like this one. If Underdog stories like this one resonate with you, take a moment to check our channel. You'll find a full catalog of powerful Underdog stories. Stories of the overlooked, the silenced, and the underestimated who rise and triumph. Thank you for watching.